another episode of Bringing Down the Grindhouse.
God damn.
Tonight we're going to talk about scary stories to tell in the dark and all the creepy tales they have inside of there. How's it going, John?
It's going really well. I enjoyed reading. Well, actually, I got the 3-book set, so I ended up going through all 3 books of it, and I got reminded of stories that were locked away somewhere in my head, and then I immediately recognized it as soon as I started reading some of the words on it. So it was a cool experience. What? Oh, because I bought it?
3 books set.
Well,
Ooh.
Mitch and I both bought it. You're the one who didn't support the artist here.
Here's the deal. So I went on Amazon and I was like, all right, I only need the first book.
Right.
I only need the first scary stories to tell in the dark. And I found it on there and it was like $50 for some fucking reason.
Whoa.
And then this 3-book set for me, because I got Prime because I bought a video card not too long ago.
Yeah.
And I randomly got Prime for like a month. And so I had a discounted one. It was like $13 for 3 books, all 3 of them.
Dang, you paid $13 for this?
$13, man.
I feel ripped off. I went to Barnes and Noble and paid like $20. Yeah, so
$7
right.
discount.
Damn.
But here, the thing with these books though is they were like mysterious on their own. The artwork was really creepy.
Right.
They were written in the 80s as well. I didn't even know that until I like read them recently.
Right.
And the interesting thing is, like, when I was in school, these books were like hidden on the bookshelf of certain teachers'
Yeah, definitely.
books and whatnot, and, like, in our bookshelves. And they were always really dusty and old and all bent up, like they'd been used tons and tons of times before. And the artwork was really creepy and weird, but it always like excited me. I was always stoked on it. I was like, these are fucking cool looking.
This is exactly why I wanted to do these, because we all have nostalgic memories of these, especially if we're within the same age group. Unless you're weird, like Percy.
Well, I grew up
I'm just kidding.
So
why didn't you get sort of initiated into some of these books? Did you just not see them?
I grew up in a super like Christian household, and I went to a Christian school for like my primary years, like I guess like 1st through 5th.
Yeah.
So books like this weren't accepted.
Oh, so
I couldn't read anything
you
like
couldn't
this.
even go through some of them.
Yeah, like when I came out here to college, it was one of the first times I'd ever heard of this book series.
Okay.
I was like 18, 19 at the time.
Wait,
Yeah.
where were you coming from again?
Like from LA?
From LA. Okay. I forgot. What?
No, I was like, what do you mean? Where do I come from?
No.
Like, my mother?
Right.
Like-
My mother's vagina. No, that's not what I meant.
So I'd never actually read these before. So this was my first time reading through it. I remember when the first time I ever encountered them, the covers of them really freaked me out. Like I was like, wow, these are some of the pictures in it while I'm like sitting there reading. I'm like, oh fuck, okay, cool. Like I'm normally not fucked up by things like that, but I think there's like some like really weird repressed part of my mind that like brought up a memory of seeing this as a child, but I had no idea what it was.
It's got to be the picture that we usually saw, which was the like severed head with a little pipe in its mouth.
I always thought it was like a clown house.
Yep. Yeah. Percy just brought it up. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Or it looks like a head growing out of the ground that's smoking a pipe or something along those lines.
Is that not what it is?
Oh, I think that's exactly.
I think exactly what it is. Yeah.
Well, before we get into it a little bit more, I want to make sure everybody knows who's here and whose voices you're listening to. So I'm one of your hosts. I'm Jonathan. We also have Persephone, as well as Mitch, and our other friend, Dorian.
I am a pig person.
Yeah, we support all pig people that exist in this world. And so in order to express pig awareness, we brought on a pig person.
I hate this.
Please do not condescend me.
I immediately thought of Minecraft. The ones that like squeal when you're in the hell version of whatever that they have.
Oh, I know. I know what you're saying. The listener doesn't. The listener might.
Well, you know what? I feel like Minecraft is one of those games where there's a pretty large like age group where people are playing it. It could be anywhere from like a tiny child who just figured out how to use an iPad to like older people with like full PC builds who are playing it.
So I watched a video of somebody who recreated the entire Starship Enterprise from Star Trek in Minecraft.
It's like a 1-1 scale, right?
And it's it's ridiculous, and there's no way that a 12-year-old did that. There's no way. That's like a wait.
I shouldn't say this because of everything, but actually one of my many jobs is I teach Minecraft to children, and they are 1,000 times smarter than us. They produce more impressive things than we do. And one day they will kill us in our deathbeds. They will not be able to wait for it. They will build strange contraptions that will crush our heads slowly, while all making scale models of U.S. buildings that have been washed away by the floods we allowed to happen by ignoring climate change.
At least we've got some really good.
What the fuck?
So slow. What the fuck?
Kids are very impressive.
Pig people, am I right, ladies and gentlemen? You can't trust them.
I got so thrown off from what I was about to say. That took me so far off track that I was like, shit, what was I even going to talk about for that one? Why did I even mention that? You know what? No, I do remember. Scratch that. I remember the reason why I thought about that was because reading through it, I kept forgetting that these are considered children's books.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about the podcast today, and I was like, oh, we're doing scary stories to read in the dark. And this guy, like, straight up was like, oh, shit, are you serious? Like, he was forced to read these as a child in school. Like, it was mandatory reading for him in a class he was in.
Weird.
And he was talking about how it was so strange to him because he was so fucked up by it as a child. He was like, we had to read this book. And, like, looking at the pictures as, like, an 8-year-old, you're like, what the fuck is going on? I'm like, what the fuck?
The paintings and illustrations of Stefan Gamel are just absolutely mind-blowingly good. He's so creative. It's like horror watercolor, and I've never seen anything like that before these books came out. And he's very, very original, like, sort of style that I've never seen. And so that was what was always very iconic about these books.
You should go look for his other art books. I went online and researched some of his art. And it's almost all exactly like this. But some of them are scarier than what they put into this book because they were trying to sort of not put the scariest ones for the children's book. But these are still pretty disturbing for some of them going through it.
Actually, that's something that I really find interesting about these books is the fact that all of the images have a certain gestalt appearance that makes them seem more frightening than they actually are. If you actually look at any one of the images, you'll notice that they're all pretty frightening, but we all see images of skulls and murder and all the literal depictions that you see inside of any one of these images all the time, and they're not as frightening. But the thing that I think is important about these is that they toe a few different lines, right? Where you have both images that are of something that is innately frightening, but there's also something comic about them. There's also a lot of weird play between light and dark. A lot of it is just blank space. So a lot of it is based on the idea of what isn't necessarily seen, which brings in the whole kind of it's trite at this point in time to bring it up, but things are scarier when you don't necessarily see them. But the important thing with this is that just enough of it is articulated. You guys did a podcast on Hereditary a little while ago, and this is what I liked about that movie. But you can see everything that's frightening in the kind of screen there, and you can see everything that's frightening inside of each one of these images, but there's just enough left out that there's something just awful about them that you can't quite put your finger on, especially as a child. Yeah. So it's mathematically built to fuck up your brain.
That made me think of, I remembered some of the images as I was going through it from when I first saw it when I was younger. And then all of a sudden, it all came back to me of remembering that image attached to the story that I was reading with it. And so it was weird, interesting, and I sort of creeped myself out reading them earlier because I ended up reading it really early in the morning at my job, at my desk. And I'm the only one in the office, so I kind of freaked out when somebody came in and, like, slammed one of the doors. But I also listened to the audiobook. They have an audiobook for this, and the guy who narrates it is really good. And so I would recommend going and finding the audiobook on YouTube because he goes through all 3 books, so it's like 3 hours of content.
An interesting thing to note about a lot of these stories is that some of them are collections of old folklore stories. Some of them are collections of stories that are written by, like, teenagers, like people who are like 14, 16 years old. Like, in there, a lot of them are written by actually written literally by children. And so they're like horror fiction for that generation, or horror fiction for children by children. And that's a very interesting thing I want to note. Like the Hearst was was not necessarily an example of this, but was an example of like an older song.
You're talking about the Hearst song.
The Hearst song, yes.
Yeah.
It's like a retelling or reskinning of an old World War I song
Right.
that was sung by the soldiers in England and America
Yeah.
at the time in order for them to be okay with the concept of dying.
Okay. Well, before we start taking some of them apart, I want to know which ones were your guys' favorites. So, Percy, you mentioned a few that you had read that you liked a lot. What was like one or two of them that you really liked?
I really enjoyed The Wendigo, and I really enjoyed Slithery D. But I would also have to say that the white dress one, the new dress, white satin dress,
The
I
white
think is what
satin
it's
dress,
called.
yeah.
And then her song.
Which one? Oh, the Hearst song. Okay. Why did you like the satin one, the white satin dress?
Because I've heard so many variations of that story, and as someone that's also very interested in like the death industry and has like a small background in like embalming and like understanding all of that, it was very interesting to like really see that. I was like, oh shit, like that's funny. And all the variations I've heard of it are so interesting. Like I didn't know it originated in this book. I don't know if this is where it's originated from, but
I
like,
don't think so. No.
oh, okay, just like hearing it, I was like, oh shit, like I'm super familiar with this. Like,
There may actually be a notation that I missed where it tells you some of the origin stories for where these came from. But that sort of theme kind of ran through all of them. They were like a collection of stories that have been told before. So some of them might be similar.
so the white satin dress is the one where a girl goes and she can't. There's a like a party coming up, like a dance party. I don't think it was
It's
prom.
It's a family dance.
Yeah,
Or not a
and-
family, a school dance.
And she couldn't buy a dress, so her mom recommends that she rents a dress. So she goes to a pawn store and she rents one, and she like dances. And at the end of the night, she feels really tired. And then they lay her down, and when they come back in the morning, they find out that she had died because the dress had embalming fluid in it. And then she absorbed it, I'm assuming, through sweating and everything, and that she died because the dress had been stolen off of a body right before it had been buried.
It's actually something that's really common in a lot of these stories is there are these themes of the problems with origin. So you see that in The Thing, you see it in the white satin dress, you see it actually in the way that the stories are built themselves and where they're sourced from. But each one of these stories is reaching back to either something mentioned in their own narratives or something that is implied within the narrative, or even outside of that, diegetically into something that happens before the story is even told, or just the idea that the story can be told in so many different ways, and it has been told in so many different ways over time. But they all kind of harken back to this idea that there's some more primal element that we're not able to perceive that is present in all the texts, right? Where because everything is always reaching back, there's always this point of terror somewhere that can't be perceived in the text itself that's always implied, which is what's present in the art too, I think.
What really makes me think about these stories in regards to what you're talking about is there is a lot to take away and to analyze for it, but the initial intention was to write it for children. And so I wonder what was the point? Why were they writing some of these horror stories for kids? And was it like for a certain purpose, I guess?
I think kids, Stephen King actually writes a little bit about this in some of his nonfiction work, though I'm not a huge fan of him. But he talks a lot about how childhood is this weird kind of dreamlike space that is and is not connected to actual life. It almost exists as pre-life, and so somehow children are already kind of tied to the past. They always say children are our future, but no, they're far more kind of elements of what horrible things we've done.
This is also like the third or fourth time that children have been mentioned on the podcast in connection to horror. What was the first podcast? Was it Ugly Children?
It was. Yes, to reiterate, there is a fascination with children being frightening in
Yeah.
horror movies, and to reiterate that point, you got like Children of the Corn, Hereditary, kind of played the movie as like this little girl is going to be like, they at least advertised it that way, like this
Right.
little girl is going to be very scary. There's stuff like The Omen, where as a child that's infested with Satan,
Yeah.
it's going to murder everyone because it's Satan.
Percy, you mentioned besides the Hearst song, what was the other one you said? The Slithery
Oh, Slithery D.
Slithery D. Why did you like Slithery D?
It's a comic, and it was really cute. Like, the way it was written and the timing of it and everything when you read it. It's, like, very rhythmic. And then it's like, I get eaten at the end.
Wait, so you were reading these stories to Mitch while you guys were driving over here?
I was.
So did you sing for the Hearst song?
Did I? I don't remember
You
if
did.
I. Yes, I did sing the Hearst song to him.
What'd you think, Mitch?
After technically being in a band with Dorian
Right.
and doing musical stuff with Dorian multiple times, as always, it was a fantastic performance.
We're going to have Dorian do special readings for these stories, and I'll be sure to drop them throughout so that you guys can hear the story and know what we're referencing. That way we can have sort of a reference point, and you don't have to go and find the book and everything. But the Her song was really good because it's really upbeat, sort of, in a way that they had created a song, even though it's talking about like a decomposing body, basically, and gets into some pretty like specific detail on what happens to your body as it decomposes.
The truth and finality of death is something that's really heavily weighed in on that song, and its history, which I basically blabbed before, is already evident.
That's another thing that's interesting about not just these texts, but the fact that they're meant for children, and a reason that they're meant for children, or an artifact of it. It's hard to say. I think it's both. I think usually the answer is both. But the fact that so much of what's inside of this is so bizarrely lighthearted. One of the reasons that there's so much of that interplay between things being terrifying and lighthearted is because of the fact that in order for... It's not just the idea that, like, for light there has to be darkness and all the philosophy 101 kind of bullshit. There's...
Yeah, like balancing it out.
Exactly, but there's something more important about these kind of balances, which is that one pushes the other one forward. And it's this ongoing kind of propulsion system that these things have, where the more lighthearted you make something that's terrifying, the more terror has to kind of fill in. And so they propel one another into this kind of state, like Scary Children, where you have to try to reconcile both, but because you can't, they both just escalate.
Did you guys read these books as children?
Yes.
So you do have like some memories of these stories.
I remember like the Big Toe story. I remember the Dead Man's Head story, and how when I was very young and I read it, I was like, that sounds like a really fun game to play. It was when I was really young. I thought that.
This is the one where they feel all of the body
They feel
parts,
all
right?
the different body parts of the dead guy.
Yeah.
These are his bones. This is his nose.
I enjoy
Things
that
like
the
that.
book kind of gave you instructions for some of these. Like if you're going to be telling them to a group of people, it gives you like, okay, make sure you jump at this person, scream at this time.
It's almost like sort of like a like an introduction to storytelling for people, and also like how to like add cool effects and sort of like acting as well. So this book could have definitely been, probably for a lot of actors and whatnot nowadays, could have been a starting point for them where they said, oh, I want to perform these for my friends. This sounds like a blast to do.
Right.
But when they're like 10 or 12 years old, and they get really into it.
You could probably get some adults scared with some of these if you do the timing right with when you scream or jump at someone.
Yeah, in fact, when it comes to performing these things, it's a bizarre story. But I come from a family of ongoing and intense mental illness, which is a great way to start a story that's more or less comical. But I don't remember which book it was in, and I don't remember which story it was, but I remember that there is a story in one of these three books about conquering a witch, or trying to conquer a witch, by nailing something to an ash tree, I think it was. And my mother was convinced that, getting rid of some details here, that someone we knew was a witch. And so I led her through this kind of ritualistic pattern of producing kind of that ash tree effigy, as if this was a nonfiction text. And of course the person did not stop being a witch, because my mother's crazy. And also I'm a child, and so anything that I'm doing is probably wrong anyway. But I don't know. I always thought that was funny that these things, even as a child, like I knew these weren't real, but there's a certain reality to anything the child experiences, that reads or otherwise, that they come into their life, and because life itself isn't real and dreamlike, everything kind of has an equal footing in a way.
Did you just casually tell me that you were part of a ritual as a child?
I was part of a lot of childhood rituals. My parents are actors, or were, in some varying degrees.
So one of my favorite stories that was read from this book was The Walk was one of them. And The Walk was really, really silly. And I only read chapter 3 of this book, and I was kind of very lukewarm about some of them, except for The Wendigo. The Wendigo is a really good folklore story, and it's a very old one, too, and it comes from many different countries will report similar horror stories like this one. That was very interesting. I loved the whole, like my feet are burning while she's walking through ice and whatnot, and I always found that very interesting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But The Walk, going back to that one, was a really interesting, it was like more or less like a really short bit, but I really liked how the language was it centered a lot on repetition. It centered a lot on it constantly came at you constantly until it has like this climax at the very end where everyone just screams randomly. And I think it'll be really funny to hear Dorian's interpretation of that later tonight, because it's hilarious. And I liked it because of the hilarity, but also because it will freak you out, and it gets that jump in energy.
I noticed the repetition throughout the book, even into the second and third books. And it was interesting to read it and then hear the audiobook where the narrator went through some of it, because the repetitions allow him to say things in a different way. And so it was a good way to build up to the ending, which was usually a scream, a scare, or some sort of jump, or just a conclusion that you were not expecting, so some sort of twist at the end.
Repetition is an important thing in, all kinds of media, obviously. There's a reason that so many rhetorical methods are based on repetition, but the rhetorical mission of repetition inside of this kind of context, I feel, bringing back the idea of children, I'm going to get into pretentious, complex things, but boiled down, there's this psychoanalytic concept called the signifying chain, and essentially the idea is that every experience that you have is based on your perception of certain symbols in your life. And symbols can be anything from the color of someone's hair to the things that you like to eat to literally anything that you perceive, because perception is so subjective in so many ways.
Well, this book was doing that, literally. It was piecing together all of the symbols into something that's really visceral for children, especially when you're reading it at that age and you haven't fully formed an opinion on a lot of things.
Right.
So when you're going through it and you're starting to hear some of the words and read them, it kind of gives you a certain feeling.
But one of the important things about the symbol usage and repetition in the symbolic chain, or the symbolizing chain, or symbolic order, it has, these are all French translations, so it's a anyway, I'm gonna call it 1,000 things. But the important thing about that is that every symbol that you perceive is based on the perception of some previous symbol. Because everything that you perceive needs context in order for it to be perceived. And this reaches back into your childhood and then into the kind of primal, even pre-childhood contexts, right? Where your memories are fuzzy or non-existent, or even the abjection from your mother when you're born, right? And so everyone's lives are based on these symbolic experiences that exist from times that we don't even remember, right? Which is why horror does so well to repeat over and over and over again, because of the fact that our lives and everything we're afraid of and everything that we desire is based on these repetitions of ideas that reach back into something that we'll never actually be able to perceive, which is why things that aren't perceived are so terrifying. Because of the fact that everything in our lives is based on that non-perception that is trying to consume us all the time.
One thing I really liked about all the other stories in this book is, why I think it would appeal to children, and why I think it also proves it is often written by children, or some of these stories are written by children, passed on through children, is the language is very, very simplistic.
Yes.
It doesn't use a lot of very scientific-y words or anything like that. You're not reading a Lovecraft story here, but they're still very effective, though. Very effective. Not incredibly wordy, just some of them are very punchy. They get right to the point, and then you will either feel the like you will feel the ooh, or you won't.
I love the descriptions of the sounds of what they're probably going to sound like. Oh, there's a specific name for that. Do you guys remember what it is? I can't remember. I can't think of it right now.
As onomatopoeia.
There you go. That's it.
It's a
Yeah.
poetic device.
Right. So it gives you an idea of what the sounds are supposed to be like. So if you wanted to include sounds, like if you were going to record your own things, or if you're going to try to do it with a group of people, gives you an idea of what you can do that. And it actually makes me think of what you said earlier, Mitch, about the storytelling aspect of it. It gives you an opportunity to act out what's going on, to be able to do it with a group of people. So it's a very collective thing.
Onomatopoeia actually also brings in it's a similar idea to the nonsense that I've already brought up. And everything I say tonight will be nonsense. But onomatopoeia...
You are a literature major, so...
Exactly. It's like a sociology major, but it makes even less sense.
I thought you were going to say less money.
Also that, yeah. We both like to talk about how people should be and how people are and how we won't fix anything. But onomatopoeia, something important about that is that it's not only it's something that everyone can experience equally as children, like woof. Of course, we know what woof is. Everyone understands woof. Everyone
I've
understands.
Never heard a dog make that
Yeah.
noise.
Well, actually, that's true. Never have I heard that. I love non-English onomatopoeia, but that's a different thing. Like bzzt is apparently the Tibetan onomatopoeia for like stubbing your toe, and it makes sense, kind of. Your funny bone, it's a bzzt. But anyway, but the other important thing about onomatopoeia inside of these texts, apart from the fact that everyone can kind of reach them and accept them as being a certain thing, but it also makes it so that there's a literal thing in the world that has a really tight symbolic connection to a word that exists. And words innately always fail to describe the thing that they are, except for onomatopoeia, which actually bring it back into reality. So a text that is so based on kind of ephemera and nonsense and people coming back from the grave and then dying and not being dead and all these different things that don't actually fit into our world, the fact that onomatopoeia is constantly in there makes it so that it's constantly dragged back into the real world and made more believable.
That makes me think of what Mitch was getting at, which was like the specific use of the words and the language to kind of get an effect out of it. And it made me think of a few of the stories that had lines that I really enjoyed, that they went away from the simplistic language and decided to use certain words that you knew would be really descriptive and good for that. One of the ones I really liked was from the story, What Do You Come For? And the body is described as the old woman watched, the parts came together into a great gangling man. The man danced around and around the room. Faster and faster he went. Then he stopped and he looked into her eyes. A lot of them had this weird, whimsical things that would happen, and almost all of them included dead bodies dancing.
That's an important thing. Not just the dancing, because there's so much rhythmics inside of this, which innately rhythmics correspond to, bodily processes, right? Which children are just beginning to experience. Heartbeats and the way that you walk and everything, these are all the entirety of a child's life, apart from what their mind is actually doing. But that's almost separate from the child. But the reconstruction of corpses that constantly happens, corpses looking for parts of their bodies, or bodies falling apart because they're together when they shouldn't be, or bodies putting themselves together. This all also kind of harkens back to what it's like to be a child and to be learning your body for the first time, and then forgetting what you just learned and trying to do it over and over again, like a child learning how to walk.
That's interesting. That makes me think of how I was feeling about the stories when I was going back through them, because I was expecting it to be really simple, kind of like children's bedtime stories where they're only like 4 or 5 sentences long, but they're actually getting into some pretty realistic things that people have to deal with as they get older, which includes death, like Mitch had mentioned earlier. And so it made me think about what I wanted to know, which was how did you guys feel going back through these? Was this something that you were remembering, or was it something new, kind of like what Percy was experiencing, because you hadn't really gone through these books? Do you read any other horror stories like on your own? Like, I know you mentioned Creepypasta in one of the other podcasts. Do you still continue to read those?
Mm-hmm. I read a lot of creepypasta. I read a lot of like SCP stories. I don't
What's
know
that?
if you're Secure, Contain, Protect. It's
Wait, what's that?
oh man, that's like a whole podcast.
Oh, it's
So
quick as
sec-
like as well. I mean, really, you can ramble on.
SCP is a writers. I would say it's like a fan base creation
Mhm.
of basically monsters or different types of like entities that are put on different levels based on like their threat to society.
Okay.
So you might have some like the most popular one is one called Peanut, and it's this really weird looking thing in the game. Two people always have to have eye contact with it because if you don't, it will like maim you. Like, but then it'll also go from like super weird ones to like there is a SCP where it is a bunch of tomatoes that will like kill you if you make a really bad joke.
oh,
Like, and then there's another one where it's like a vending machine from Japan that like vends otherworldly shit from it when you put like coins and
that
stuff
sounds like
into
a
it.
cool short story to be able to have a vending machine that gives you weird shit. Like, can you choose? Like, does it have like a menu of what's in it, or just shoots out random shit? So wait, I don't think I understand. I don't think I understand the concept of the stories though. Like, is this being built upon by like the community?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't actually remember what you were talking about when you first brought it up, but now my mind is lit ablaze again, and I remember everything. But I've been it's a guilty pleasure of mine, but I listen to a lot of creepypasta stuff on YouTube. I don't do so much reading of that because of the fact that I'm lazy and the reading I already do kills me. I guess the idea of these, and correct me if I'm wrong, please do, but the idea of them essentially is less that they're narratives and more that they're single kind of, like if you're playing a video game and if you fight an enemy and then you go into your inventory and it says,
Collective, yeah.
this motherfucker is terrifying because he spits acid in your face. And that's pretty much what they are.
It's like a Pokedex of horrible shit.
A Pokedex of horrible shit. Exactly. That's fucking
Okay.
beautiful. But the thing that's awesome about these, I think, is that anyone, I mean, of course, the cool thing and the horrible thing about the internet is that anyone can add to it, right? But the cool thing about the, SCPs?
Yeah,
right?
SCP. Yeah.
So the cool thing about those is that you have this ever-developing list of these entities that don't exist, but all necessarily reflect on some kind of cultural phenomena that the person is concerned with. And so what were the ones you brought up?
Peanut, which is that one where you have to like look at it. It's
Right.
I'll
And
bring
two
up a
people have to do it.
picture because once you see the picture, everyone will recognize what I'm talking about.
So what's interesting about two people having to view that?
So two people, if you're in a room with it, you cannot have your back to it. Two people need to, or at least one person has to have eyes on it because if not, it will kill you if one person is not looking at it. Or if no one's looking at it, it will come after you.
Which is terrifying because then you have to trust someone else, right? And not only do you have to trust someone else, but it also invokes this terrifying idea that we all have in this world of kind of postmodern subjectivity where if someone else is viewing something that you don't, or if you're viewing, even worse, if you're viewing something that someone else doesn't see, then you are either cast off, or you're not living in an actual world, or you're crazy, or you're stupid, right? And then the thing that produces random shit out of it, right? The vending machine, that brings me back to like the idea of the monkey paw, right? Where you want something, and I'm guessing, because I don't remember that one, but I'm guessing that everything that it spits out is something that will eventually become horrible, right?
Yeah, like it'll be like you'll get a bag of chips, but then you open up the bag of chips and you're like, oh shit, there's something fucked up
This
in
is
it.
just toenails.
Oh
Yeah.
God.
So I am biased, and I always see everything as a critique on capitalism because capitalism is the thing that makes me miserable every day because I'm a literature major.
Right.
But that immediately jumps out to me, where you have a vending machine that spits shit out at you, and it's always something that makes your life worse because everything I've ever bought has made me sad.
Wait. So each encounter then with these creatures or any entity that they're dealing with is its own story then, and people keep making these new stories.
So
No,
I
dog,
can
they're not
read
stories,
you
they're just
one
Pokedex
just so you
entries.
understand like what SCP is. So Peanut is technically SCP-173, so it'll like classify it. So it's like item number SCP-173, object class it's a Euclid, special containment procedures. Item SCP-173 is to be kept in a locked container at all times. When personnel must enter SCP-173's container, no fewer than 3 may enter at a time, and the door is to be re-locked behind them.
Okay.
At all times, two persons must maintain direct eye contact with SCP-173 until all personnel have vacated and relocked the container.
Gotcha. I misunderstood. These are just, they give you like an idea of what you're dealing with, and then it creates that sort of index of knowledge then for these random creatures. What does it stand for again?
Secure, contain, protect, if I'm right. Yeah.
So people create these and then put it where? Is it like a website?
It has its own wiki.
Oh, it has its own wiki. Okay. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that have its own wiki, but that's interesting. So you can go and find just thousands of these things.
Yeah, there's our subreddit for it. Then if you read like our No Sleep on Reddit, that's very popular.
I don't like those.
There's the No Sleep podcast. Like, ooh, that's some freaky shit.
You know, I was thinking. I remember I pitched the idea to both of you of running like a horror RP session, sort of deal.
Yeah.
And maybe what I will do is I will go peruse the SCP.
Ooh.
And then I'll find an interesting monster from there, and then I'll try to create one for a session, and then we can have a fun little like haunted house sort of issue with that particular creature.
I like that. That sounds like a good idea. We should definitely do something like that. How did you even come across these?
So I came across, creepypastas were like my favorite thing at one point, because you have like the scary Squidward one and all the other ones. You know?
That was
so
like, weird.
Oh,
that one especially, where they had like a secret episode.
Yeah, like the fucked up looking Squidward face or whatever. Like,
I don't even fully understand what creepypasta is, except for I just know that it's like creepy narratives that are spread around, but I don't even know like any of the specifics about them. Like, I have no idea what it means when you say the Squidward one and things like that.
A very popular one that a lot of people know is Lavender Town from Pokemon, which is a super popular creepypasta. If you play the music, and the town is supposed to be like the ghosts of people in Pokemon, and the song in the background's really creepy. There's another one that I can't think of. If you've ever heard of like Jeff the Killer, if you've heard of like those, are your like standard, like normal fucking everybody knows what these creepypasta, and that's what it is. It's like a genre of creepy writings from people.
Most of them are taken from popular culture. Yeah. So like things that you know or you think you know a lot about, they'll add in a secret element or something that you didn't know, or a reinterpretation of what it was, kind of like what they did with the Bump from Adult Swim, where they explained what the sounds were for the final bump, the one that's like the dawn is your enemy. Yeah. So they'll re-image whatever is already in existence and then change it up a bit. And that's the main point of the creepypastas, and they're all like on a website too.
If you want like a popular, like a very mainstream run right now, it's Momo.
Yeah, there you go.
The kids that I teach fucking love Momo, and by loving Momo, I mean they fucking hate Momo, and they are sure that Momo is going to make them kill themselves, which is also a weirdly common trope in teaching children. It seems like they all talk about killing themselves.
Wait, you've had kids talk about that?
Yes.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Well, about Momo or suicide, because both. Yes. Yes.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Oh yeah. So the big backlash with Momo right now is that it was like a thing where it was telling children to like talk to it, and it would basically be like, cut yourself, go kill yourself, like do these things. And like that's how like parents got concerned, was that like a mom, one of the articles I read recently was like a mom concerned that her child was talking to fucking Momo. Like
you know, all of the articles that I've read so far, which is interesting that you phrase it that way, and you probably just have a different entry into this. It's more primal than mine, because mine's pretty recent. Mm-hmm. But everything that I've read about Momo is talking about either the child killing themselves or the child killing the family, and very little of it actually has to do with like non-terminal self-harm of the child. So I think it's interesting that articles, per my theory currently, have kind of shifted over from focusing on this is bad for kids and that's scary to, oh no, this is bad for family units and it's scary.
I can't stand Momo's face. I usually will shut it anytime I see it.
It's so fucking cute. I almost said hot. I couldn't figure it out. Which joke do I make?
It's like stressful looking to me because
Yeah.
it's not like bad, like especially the original art piece. It's like a woman's
God,
face,
yeah.
like the bird fucking thing with the bird hands or whatever.
Well, the
like
guy,
it's weird, like you know, and I'm like, oh, so I just don't like looking at it. Like
didn't he have to like make a video and be like,
he
"This is-"
destroyed it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He was like, "This is just an art piece. I'm destroying it. Like, please don't make any more."
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. She was like, "Please don't put this into like a meme anymore." Ugh, yeah, that's it.
That's one of my favorite things and least favorite things about internet culture at this point, is that it has this tendency to take pieces of art, and this happens a lot, from Momo to Pepe to there was this piece of art where a bunch of like fleshy pig humans that are unlike myself entirely, because I'm a pig person but a different kind, were all suckling at this breast of this other monstrous creature. Like, art is really frequently taken and then reappropriated by internet culture to mean totally different things from what the artist initially intended. And I hate that in a way, because I can imagine someone taking anything that I've ever made, which is not much because I suck, but taking anything I've ever made and just making it into like, or something like that. It's like, no, wait, hold on, slow the fuck down. But then the people that have these pieces of art stolen from them, they never get any kind of credit for them, even if it's bad credit, right? And so the other side of it, and I haven't made up my mind, and I'm not going to make up my mind because both sides are kind of right in this, I think, but is that because of the fact that this has entered into the kind of the cultural sphere and has been appropriated to mean different and terrifying things, maybe you should leave it out there, because maybe it will either reconcile itself somewhere, or maybe the fact that you have some influence. I mean, no one's going to be able to change art once it already exists. Like, you as the author can never, you're dead as soon as you create the thing. You can never alter the way that it's perceived once it's out there. But I feel almost as if maybe art being changed once it's in the cultural sphere is good, and you shouldn't try to kill it even if it becomes something abominable, because it's not going to die. You know,
Well,
so at least linking it to you would be good, maybe. I don't know.
with the technology we have now, you put something out there and it's out there forever. So it's kind of like that. That is kind of a hard thing to go through. But I'm going to go off on a random tangent about something I think we've all seen, which was the Love, Death, and Robots.
How dare you go on tangents?
I know. You guys have seen Zima Blue, the one with the. You haven't seen that one? It's the one with the pool washing robot.
It's so good.
It's so good.
I'm finishing that whole thing tonight.
You
I
haven't,
d-
oh, man, you haven't
because I'm
watched
watching it with someone. I told him
Oh,
I wouldn't continue watching it.
Wow.
I mean, Zima Blue is like the idea of like the mainstream artist sort of idea is what I'm
There
getting.
was so many things
And-
packed into that.
Oh, it's really dense for like a 7-minute short.
Yeah.
It's really dense, and I absolutely love the character Zima himself is just great. His whole persona and like the narrative is told really well, and I'm laughing myself the whole time. And then it gets to this really like empathetic message of, you know, I just really want to return to simplicity. Like, everything's too complicated now. I really just want to return to like who I am as my base.
I feel like that art style of the fucking, I don't know why I can't think of the type of art style it is, but the most like popular version or like most popular thing from that time is the fucking urinal by R. Mutt that's like flipped upside down.
Oh my God.
Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, and I can't think of the artist's name. Like, my art history background's like failing me. But I feel like that return to simplicity is like hardcore, like apparent in that, because you have like, you know, this mundane ass piece. It's like when you have kids that go to museums and they'll sit like their glasses on the fucking
I love
ground. You
those.
get people that are like, oh shit, hold on, that's art. It's like, no, dude, I sat my shit on the ground.
Those are my favorite. I love videos like that. Someone put a pair of sunglasses down in a corner and did that. But they did it on purpose, and they were watching everyone else around.
I don't know if I should like describe the episode more, because I'd be spoiling it for some
Right,
people.
I know.
Please don't.
You know, yeah, and I
Okay.
really don't want to, because it's a great short, and
Yeah.
you know, from that, one of my favorite shorts ever is the Three Robots one.
I love the Three
My
Robots
favorite short.
one.
Tell them the description that you gave me before I watched it.
Before the Three Robots
Yeah.
one, it's like it's just a really nihilistic look at like a dystopian, like, or not dystopian, but an apocalyptic setting with 3 robots that are just analyzing human history.
There was that one in the, what was it?
The other one
40K?
is this. No, it's Star. Not Star Wars. Oh my God, StarCraft. There we go. Jesus, StarCraft Farm Simulator. That's one of the other episodes, and it's fantastic.
That's so accurate.
This is another tangent, maybe, but there's something really interesting to me about the fact that you can articulate the difference between post-apocalyptic and dystopian. Because doesn't that imply that, yeah, I mean, it implies one is different from the other, right?
Yes.
And I think it's fair to say that one is different from the other, but I think that if you think about it enough, they're not.
Well, yeah, because you can have a dystopian world after a post-apocalyptic event.
Like The Road.
I think you need to have a dystopian world after a post-apocalyptic one. I think a post-apocalyptic world is a dystopian world, right?
Well, couldn't it turn into a utopian world at some point then?
I don't know if you're annihilating your civilization. I don't have a whole lot of hope for you,
well,
but it could. Yeah, sure.
Rebuild.
Technically, yes.
Oh,
I mean,
you have such a good face. What's up, Percy?
It's just when y'all were like, oh, you know, like annihilating whatever. I thought of Thanos like immediately, and I was just
oh my
like,
God, and we're back.
perfectly balanced as all things should be.
Wow.
To cut the Marvel movies out of this, because I cannot fucking do that. I'm going to make it unlistenable instead of whatever that was going to be. So Walter Benjamin, or Walter Benjamin, because I'm pronouncing one name in German and one in English for some reason because I'm an idiot. He came up with this idea of divine violence. And the idea is more complicated than I can communicate, and so this is going to be disarticulated in some bizarre way, and I'm sorry. But essentially the idea of divine violence is a violence that is non-coercive, does not produce blood so far as others can see it, and does not lead to a fluctuation of power, only an annihilation of it.
Can you give me an example?
There is no example. His example...
Well, yeah, I was going to say, he must have had at least
is
one.
bad. His examples are all wrong. But they're all from the Old Testament. You either have... I'm sorry, I forget the name. Korah. It was Korah. So you have suddenly the earth opens up and swallows up a city full of evildoers. And they're just simply gone. Their property is not there to be misused by the people that are there to fill in the space. There is no blood to be seen. There is no vengeance to be had. They simply disappear. Or Noah's flood, I think. I've written some papers on that as being perhaps an example. But the idea of these dystopias, right? The dystopia means that the world is soaked in blood, not that the blood is absent. And so I don't think that a utopia can exist unless you have a massive, non-coercive calamity that just expiates everything, right? And so you can either have a worldwide general strike where every worker just decides to put down their wrenches and do nothing and destroy capital, or you can have everyone die. Those are the only ones I can imagine.
Dystopias often do fall into a sort of either something like Dorian was saying, either you have to have something very catastrophic that affects everyone globally, force this change, or it's an attempt at a better life that has failed. It usually falls under one of those two categories.
Pretty much everyone is put on an equal playing field, right? And that's why we like zombie movies and stuff, but that's fucking stupid. That's a wrong way of viewing the world after catastrophe, because the only people that survive catastrophes are people that have something, right? If there's a catastrophe, everyone that is not the right race or, just the right trope in general is going to get killed by the fucking crazy motherfuckers that decide, oh, cool, the police are all dead, and I get to do whatever the fuck I want. Or they'll fight back, and that's awesome, but then they have to fight against all the rich people, who are always racist pieces of shit, because fuck rich people. I don't like any rich people, and please never anyone giving me money. I want to die poor. I want to die alone.
Well, you do have a degree in literature.
I do have a degree in literature, so I'm working on it.
You're on your way.
But essentially the idea is that whenever you have an apocalyptic scenario, the people that will survive are never the people that you want to survive inside of your kind of euphoric vision of it.
I think the only reason why... Okay, I'm going to argue.
It's always a dystopia.
No, I have to argue against it. Because I think the reason why you think that's what's going on, is because the only version of dystopian stories that we ever get is of terrible people, because otherwise the story would be really boring, because then you just have like these nice people who are enjoying their lives in this area, which doesn't make for good media and like good storytelling.
Essentially, I'm saying that all dystopian narratives are wrong. I think that they're written the wrong way.
I get you.
Where you have people that are shitty because all people are shitty, and that's why we have to deal with a dystopia or a post-apocalyptic narrative. But people aren't shitty enough. There's not enough stratification. Everyone thinks that I will get to be shitty when the world ends, and then things will be fine. But,
okay.
Yeah.
No, I get you.
But to bring it all back, it's interesting to me, yet again, with the whole repetition narrative, right? Where a thing that you own is the thing that you become, right? Or a thing that you perceive is what you become. Or when you have, like, the thing per se, it's this story that essentially has two men who are looking out into a field and they see something moving around, and they're not sure what it is, and then after a while, it continues following them, and so one of the men follows it in order to see if it's real, and he wants to touch it, but I don't actually believe he does in the text, which is bizarre to me, but whatever. And so they continue walking, and they go home, and then they see that the thing is standing outside their house, and it's this weird skeletal form, and it's frightening, yada yada. But the important thing is that once they're home, the thing never sees them again, as far as we know, and one of the characters gets sick and dies and looks just like the thing after he's dead. Which goes along with this whole memory repeating itself thing, right?
Can you do your reading?
Do we want a live reading right now?
Yes.
I absolutely want a live reading right
Okay.
now.
Which story do you guys want to hear first?
Her song. I want to hear the singing.
It's true. I think we all want to hear the singing.
Serenade us.
Don't you ever laugh as the hearse goes by, for you may be the next to die. They wrap you up in a big white sheet from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. It all goes well for about a week. Then you cough and it begins to leak. The worms crawl and the worms crawl out. The worms play pinnacle. Am I pronouncing that right? On your snout. They eat your eyes. They eat your nose. They eat the jelly between your toes. A big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your eyes. Your stomach turns a slimy green and pus pours out like whipping cream. You spread it on a slice of bread, and that's what you eat when you're dead.
That's great.
Oh, thank you,
that.
thank you.
I love that I got to hear two different versions of this song. I heard the audiobook version and I heard yours just now, which is even funnier by the fact of you interrupting your own thing to be like, did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, I mean, doubt always makes things better, you know.
I think Dorian should read The Walk because I think he does a really good reading of that one.
really?
I think he does a good reading
All
of
right.
The Walk,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead and read The Walk.
My uncle was walking down a lonely dirt road one day. He came upon a man who was walking down that road. The man looked at my uncle. My uncle looked at him. The man was scared of my uncle, and my uncle was scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and it began to get dark. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was very scared of my uncle, and my uncle was very scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and they came to a big woods. It was getting darker. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man, and the man was really scared of my uncle, and my uncle was really scared of the man. But they kept on walking, and deep down into the woods they went. It was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was terrible scared of my uncle, and my uncle was terrible scared of...
I secretly turned down the volume on my headphones.
Oh, good. I
'cause
should have looked
knew-
away.
Yeah. For me and Percy. 'cause
Oh,
we're,
God, Percy. Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Does anybody here remember a time when someone actually had a sit down ghost story with you guys? Like you actually did the whole traditional ghost story thing? But I've never actually had like a real sit down ghost story before.
What? So you never
I've never had that experience.
like not around a campfire?
No.
Not like with
Nope.
your
I've done
friends?
I did like the camp thing where there's like a counselor that has a guitar and does that. But I've
Wow.
never done like the let's tell the scary
It's
story.
really campy.
And then everyone shits themselves. No, I never had that.
Percy, have you had an experience like that?
Yeah, kinda.
What happened?
Like we sat around and told a ghost story. Like, is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Well, that's what he's asking.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a fucking camp thing. They tried to do the spooky ghosts, and you know, we had a story, and then somebody came jumping out the trees, and she got the shit socked out of her.
Wait. Someone jumped out to scare you guys and they got socked?
Yeah, like a kid stood up and like punched her dead in the fucking throat. That was the only time I've ever had a ghost story.
Can you imagine the counselor that had to fucking do that?
Yeah,
and then-
dude. Like it was like this child was already. So he was a first. Like when I met this child, I always remember him because his name was Marvin. When he was a first grader, he was 5'9" as a fucking first grader. This child was ginormous. There was something wrong. Either he was just really fucking stupid and he was actually older than he was, but he was a ginormous like first grader.
Wait, how old are you in first grade?
Like fucking
6, 7, maybe.
sorry, not first, like third or fourth grade. Let's say like third or fourth, somewhere
Older?
around there. Yeah.
So he's like
so
12.
yeah, somewhere around there. Like fucking no, like 10.
Whatever.
But it was like nuts because he was like a scaredy ass kid too. So like, you know, they have this fucking dumbass counselor that's like, I'm gonna hide in these trees while they tell this little story because that's the way to go. And they do that nonsense, and you know they're telling the story, and like you know, and then she comes down from the fucking trees, and that kid stood up and just went bop and just bopped her straight in the fucking neck. Like, was not having it.
My brother, he's 10 years older than I am, and so when I was growing up,
So he's like 60?
yeah, he's 10,010 years old. But no, he's 10 years older than I am, and so when I was 5, he's 15, which is the cruelest age. I don't know which one I'm referencing, but they're both pretty fucked up. And so when I'm this little child, he's as close to an adult as you can be and still be a child. And so he kept on telling me horrifying stories and shit. So my entire upbringing from like 3 on has been horrifying stories, and being told by my parents that if I say no to the cults that we live in, I'd get reincarnated as a cripple for 7 decades, or 7 generations. I'm sorry. So yeah, no, scary stories are a big part of my life.
Now that I think about it, I've had a lot of moments where people were telling scary stories in a group setting.
Were you Catholic?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That there couldn't have been a more perfect question or setup for that, because that is like half of their teachings is scaring the shit out of you. And then having these events where you're all gathered together doing weird shit like this. I went to a lot of those camps, like the Catholic school, whatever the fuck they send you off. And it's like they had one in 6th grade, they had one in 8th grade, they had another one in high school, and then we had to go to mass every Wednesday at my Catholic private high school. I just distinctly remember the religion teacher, because we had a religion teacher, got really upset with me because I asked him about Lilith and why he was not talking about this woman. And he was like, how the fuck do you know about that? First of all, you're like 10. And then got into it and was like saying she didn't exist, and it was all these collection of stories that weren't included in the Bible. And I was like, but isn't the Bible like the best of collection?
I was gonna ask, like, did he mention that it's all apocryphal and maybe added in post? But yeah. No, that's a big thing. I don't know, dude. Like I guess that's the problem with a lot of those religious texts, because I read a lot of them. The Mahabharata is something I focus on a lot, and a lot of Christian texts I focus on a lot. And I try to view them with kind of like a more formal, neutral gaze, but at the same time, you can't do much unless you're viewing the culture around them. And Christian culture is so like weird and narcissistic and toxic inside of our like wider culture that it's hard to view it in any way that's subjective. But yeah, so the little story and shit, I don't know, dude. Fucking like, it's not part of it, but also It's definitely part of it if you don't like that stuff.
This just makes me think of those shows that they have on, I guess, the History Channel and Discovery Channel that just pose questions and then make you ask more questions and never answer anything, like the Alien
Was Hitler a
series.
Nazi?
Exactly.
Was he an occultist Nazi? The answers are yes, but is there more?
Yes,
The answer is yes. Is there more?
because we need to make more money and keep this show running and to stay on the network.
Here's where I say a joke about ancient aliens, but I'm not going to because I'm too fucking tired. I'm just so fucking tired. I can't do it.
Oh, is that what that? You know what I like about those shows?
Go with the hair. You like the
Yeah.
hair.
No. What I like about those shows
Oh.
is the little titles that they'll bring up so that you can know their official title. And sometimes it'll be something official. It'll be like Doctor something. But other times it says something like, I don't know, writer of such and such book.
Dorian Bell, continued child.
And it's like, it has no bearing on what they're supposed to be talking about. And they just go into all this nonsense. So they're really just interviewing all of these hacks who don't really know what they're talking about. Or they let them talk for like 30 minutes and they're like, that's the episode. Thank you.
I mean, to be fair, like how many people with PhDs are like running or the entirety of our government in like a terrifying, like neoliberal way,
I would,
based entirely on the fact that they have a degree that doesn't matter.
I really want to know the statistics for how many people currently in office hold degrees.
Not one of them. Well, no, he has a degree from a cool ass business school because he's very smart and talented.
So I just want to remind everybody that we're really easy to find now because we're on every streaming service. So wherever you listen to podcasts, go ahead and search up Bringing Down the Grindhouse. So the main ones, Spotify, Google Play Music, iTunes. Easy to find. Really appreciate all of you coming out to talk with us tonight. And hope you guys have a good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
That was beautiful.
What do you come for? There was an old woman who lived all by herself, and she was very lonely. Sitting in the kitchen one night, she said, "Oh, I wish I had some company." No sooner had she spoken than down the chimney tumbled 2 feet from which the flesh had rotted. The old woman's eyes bulged with terror. Then 2 legs dropped to the hearth and attached themselves to the feet. Then a body tumbled down, and then 2 arms, and a man's head. As the woman watched, the parts came together into a great, gangling man. The man danced around and around the room. Faster and faster he went. Then he stopped, and he looked into her eyes. "What do you come for?" she asked in a small voice, and shivered and shook. "What do I come for?" he said. "I come for you!" Aaron Kelly was dead. They bought him a coffin and had a funeral for him and buried him. But that night, he got out of his coffin and he came home. His family was sitting around the fire when he walked in. He sat down next to his widow and said, "What's going on? You all act like somebody died. Who's dead?" His widow said, "You are." "I don't feel dead," he said. "I feel fine." "You don't look fine," his widow said. "You look dead. You better get back to the grave where you belong." "I'm not going to go back to the grave until I feel dead," he said. Since Aaron wouldn't go back, his widow couldn't collect his life insurance. Without that, she couldn't pay for the coffin. Aaron didn't care. He just sat by the fire, rocking in a chair and warming his hands and feet. But his joints were dry, and his back was stiff. And every time he moved, he creaked and cracked. One night, the best fiddler in town came to court the widow. Since Aaron was dead, the fiddler wanted to marry her. The two of them sat on one side of the fire, and Aaron sat on the other side, creaking and cracking. "How long do we have to put up with this dead corpse?" the widow asked. "Something must be done," the fiddler said. "This isn't very jolly," Aaron said. "Let's dance!" The fiddler got out his fiddle and began to play. Aaron stretched himself, shook himself, got up, took a step or two, and began to dance. With his old bones rattling and his yellow teeth snapping and his bald head waggling and his arms flip-flopping around and around he went. With his long legs clicking and his knee bones knocking, he skipped and pranced around the room. How that dead man danced! But pretty soon a bone worked loose and fell to the floor. "Look at that," said the fiddler. "Play faster," said the widow, and the fiddler played faster. Crickety-crack, down and back the dead man went hopping, and his dry bones went dropping. This way, that way, the pieces kept popping. "Play, man, play," cried the widow. The fiddler fiddled, and the dead man danced. Then Aaron fell apart, collapsed into a pile of bones, all except his bald head bone. That grinned at the fiddler, cracked its teeth, and kept dancing. "Look at that," groaned the fiddler. "Play louder," cried the widow. "Ho, ho, ho," said the head bone. "Ain't we having fun?" The fiddler couldn't stand it. Widow, he said, "I'm going home." And he never came back. The family gathered up Aaron's bones and put them back in the coffin. They mixed them up so he couldn't fit them together. After that, Aaron stayed in his grave. But his widow never did get married again. Aaron had seen to that. A new horse. Two farmhands shared a room. One slept at the back of the room. The other slept near the door. After a while, the one who slept near the door began to feel very tired early in the day. His friend asked what was going wrong. "An awful thing happens every night," he said. "A witch turns me into a horse and rides me all over the countryside." "I'll sleep in your bed tonight," his friend said. "We'll see what happens to me." About midnight, an old woman who lived nearby came into the room. She mumbled some strange words over the farmhand, and he found he couldn't move. Then she slipped a bridle on him, and he turned into a horse. The next thing he knew, he was riding across the fields at breakneck speed. She was beating him to make him go even faster. Soon they came to a house where a party was going on. There was a lot of music and dancing. They were having a big time inside. She hitched him to a fence and went in. While she was gone, the farmhand rubbed against the fence until the bridle broke off, and he turned back into a human being. Then he went into the house and found the witch. He spoke those strange words over her, and with the bridle, he turned her into a horse. Then he rode her to a blacksmith and had her fitted with horseshoes. After that, he rode her to the farm where she lived. "I have a pretty good filly here," he told her husband, "but I need a stronger horse. Would you like to trade?" The old man looked over, and he said that he would do it. So they picked out another horse, and the farmhand rode away. Her husband led his new horse to the barn. He took off the bridle and went to hang it up. But when he came back, the new horse was gone. Instead, there stood his wife with horseshoes nailed to her hands and feet.